That summer, I was assigned to a small town on the outskirts of a neighboring city. The task itself was simple: to verify records related to a criminal case that had already been closed, and to complete several procedural confirmations requested by my superiors. It was the kind of assignment we casually referred to as routine paperwork. Low risk, no urgency, nothing that required heightened alertness. I assumed I would leave in the morning, finish the work within an hour or two, and return the same day. But reality rarely unfolds according to our assumptions. The road leading to the town was narrow, winding, and badly deteriorated. The bus lurched and rattled for hours, crawling forward as if struggling against the terrain itself. In some sections, the road was so uneven that I felt the vehicle might tip over at any moment. By the time we arrived, the afternoon sun was already sinking toward the horizon. The town was smaller than I had imagined. Quiet, too quiet, an unsettling stillness hung in the air. I ate a quick bowl of noodles at a roadside stall and headed straight to the local commune office. There was no independent police station here. All administrative records were kept at the commune. The guard informed me that the two officers responsible for the files were out conducting fieldwork and would return shortly. So I waited. Nearly 3 hours passed before they arrived. The verification itself took far less time than expected. Documents were reviewed, signatures added, stamps pressed into place. Everything was completed efficiently. I stood up, thanked them, and prepared to leave immediately. As I turned toward the door, one of the older officers called out to me. "At this hour, there won't be any buses left," he said calmly. "Why don't you stay at the guest house for the night?" I smiled politely and declined. It was still daylight. How could there be no buses? I thanked him again and walked out toward the station. Only when I arrived did I realize how naive that assumption had been. The bus station was empty. No buses, no posted schedules, no waiting passengers. I approached an elderly woman selling ice cream nearby and asked about the last departure. She hesitated, spoke in a halting voice, and then told me that the town only had 2 buses a day. The final one had left less than 10 minutes earlier. After she finished speaking, she looked at me and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was crooked, stretched unnaturally across her face, as though she were forcing it, like someone who knew something I didn't. For reasons I couldn't explain, my chest tightened. I turned away and stood along the main road, hoping that perhaps another bus or a passing truck might appear. Time dragged on. The sky dimmed. Not a single vehicle passed. No motorbikes, no trucks. The road was wide but eerily empty, as if it existed only as a prop. When I turned back to ask the woman another question, she was gone. Not only her, but her ice cream cart as well. Given her age and the size of the cart, it was impossible for her to have disappeared so quickly. A vague unease crept up my spine. In the end, I had no choice but to accept the truth. I was spending the night in this town. I did not return to the commune guest house. Having already declined the offer, going back would have felt awkward for both sides. Instead, I decided to look for a private inn. The town was small, and so were the options. Several places I checked were dim, damp, and poorly maintained. Some emitted a musty odor the moment the door opened. I was beginning to reconsider when I noticed a 2-story white building not far ahead. What caught my attention was not the paint, but the sign. It was a blinking neon sign. At the time, even in larger cities, neon signage was uncommon. Seeing one in a remote town like this felt oddly out of place. The glow pulsed faintly against the growing dusk, drawing my attention against my better judgment. I walked toward it. 4 characters glimmered on the sign, Vuong Thu Guesthouse. The name carried an old, almost archaic tone, as if the place had existed far longer than it appeared. I pushed the door open. The light inside made me pause. The interior was not luxurious, but it was spotless, unnaturally so. Everything was arranged neatly, with nothing excessive or out of order. A faint scent lingered in the air, subtle and pleasant, though I couldn't identify it. Behind the counter stood a woman. She wore simple house clothes, her hair neatly tied back. Her skin was pale, her features composed, her expression calm. There was something about her demeanor that didn't match the town. She didn't look like someone who belonged here. She greeted me softly. "Are you looking for a room?" Beside her stood a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old. Her hair was tied into 2 small pigtails, and she wore a simple dress. Her face was round, her eyes large and dark. She was beautiful in a way that felt artificial, like a child printed on a calendar rather than one you'd meet in real life. I asked if there were rooms available. The woman checked her register and said only a triple room remained, or I could stay in her husband's room since he wouldn't be back that night. I hesitated. I was carrying my service weapon and important documents. But outside, night was falling and I had no alternatives. She led me through the back courtyard. It was small and immaculate, with a concrete lotus pond in the center. Beyond it stood a 2-story building that looked newly constructed. She guided me upstairs, down the corridor, and opened a red-painted door at the very end. The room was spacious, pristine, and fully furnished. A double bed, white curtains, an electric fan, a television. Everything looked untouched, too perfect. I agreed to stay. Before leaving, she brought me hot water. Then she paused at the doorway, turned back, and spoke quietly. "It's best not to open the window. If it's hot, just use the fan." With that, she left. I stood alone in the center of that impossibly clean room, struck by a sudden thought. It felt like I had stepped into a place not meant for the living. And that was when everything truly began. Sleep did not come easily. The fan hummed steadily above me, pushing warm air across the room. Yet I felt an unnatural chill lingering beneath my skin. The bed was soft, too soft, as if it had never borne the weight of a human body before. I lay still, listening to the sounds, or rather the lack of them. No insects, no distant voices, no dogs barking. The silence pressed in from all sides. At some point, I became aware of something else, breathing. It was not my own. The sound was faint, slow, and close enough that I could feel it brush against the back of my neck. My muscles tensed, every instinct trained into me over years of service, screamed for me to move, to reach for my weapon. But I didn't. I remained. Frozen, eyes open in the darkness, counting the seconds between each breath. Then the mattress shifted slightly, just enough to suggest that someone or something was lying beside me. I turned my head in a sudden motion. Nothing. The other half of the bed was empty, smooth, untouched. I exhaled slowly, convincing myself that fatigue was playing tricks on my senses. Rural nights had a way of amplifying imagination. I closed my eyes again. That was when I heard it, a soft sob. At first, I thought it came from inside the room. I sat up, heart pounding, scanning the shadows. The sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't nearby, it was outside. A child's crying. I swung my legs off the bed and crossed the room in 2 steps, stopping in front of the window. I remembered the woman's warning, "Don't open the window." For a moment, I hesitated. Then another sob echoed through the night, thin and desperate. I pushed the window open. Cold air rushed in. Below, under the dim street light, stood a small figure. The little girl from the front desk. She was barefoot, her dress hanging loosely, shoulders shaking as she cried. The street was empty. No adults, no movement, no sound besides her sobbing. I grabbed my jacket, holstered my gun, and rushed downstairs. By the time I reached the street, she had already turned and begun walking away. "Hey," I called out, "where are you going?" She didn't answer. She simply walked, her small steps steady, as if she knew exactly where she was headed. I followed at a cautious distance, scanning my surroundings. The town felt different at night, narrower, darker, the buildings looming like silent observers. She stopped beneath a flickering street lamp and turned to face me. Her eyes were dry now, calm, too calm. "There's someone who wants to kill my father," she said. The words struck me harder than I expected. "Where is your father?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She raised her arm and pointed down. "The road." Without another word, she began walking again. Every rational part of my mind told me this was wrong. A child wandering alone at night. A claim that sounded more like a line from a nightmare than reality. But instinct overruled reason. I followed, my hand resting near my holster. The road she led me down was darker than the rest of the town. The streetlights were spaced farther apart, some completely dead. The buildings thinned out, replaced by empty lots and half-abandoned warehouses. Then I heard it, an engine, low, heavy. Headlights burst into view at the far end of the road, a large truck moving fast, far too fast for such a narrow street. I shouted, reaching for the girl. "Get back!" She didn't react. The truck roared closer, its horn blaring. I lunged forward, too late. The impact was brutal. The girl's body was thrown aside, striking the ground with a sound I will never forget. The truck did not slow. It barreled past me and vanished into the darkness. For a moment, everything went silent. I dropped to my knees beside the girl. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. There was no blood, no warmth, just stillness. My training kicked in. I reached for my radio, no signal. I stood, anger and shock burning through me, and turned toward the direction the truck had gone. A figure stood beneath a broken streetlight. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden in shadow. "Stop!" I shouted, drawing my weapon. "Police!" The man stepped forward into the light. I froze. I knew that face, not from memory, but from photographs, from case files, from execution records. Trio Jai Hai, the same man whose file I had verified that afternoon, the man who had been executed years ago. He smiled. I fired. The gunshot echoed through the street, deafening in the silence. I saw the muzzle flash. I felt the recoil. The bullet flew straight toward him and passed through, as if he weren't there at all. He laughed softly, a sound, devoid of warmth, and turned back toward the truck now idling further down the road. He climbed in. The engine roared to life once more. I fired again and again. Each shot passed through empty air. The truck accelerated, disappearing into the darkness beyond the warehouses. I stood there, weapon lowered, my mind struggling to reconcile what I had just seen. I turned back toward where the girl's body lay. She was gone. No blood, no body. No sign that anything had happened at all. The street was empty. Wind stirred a scrap of paper along the pavement. I stood alone, surrounded by silence, holding a gun that still smelled of burnt powder. In all my years on the force, I had faced violence, death, and human cruelty in many forms. But nothing had prepared me for the realization settling in my chest at that moment. I had just chased a murderer who did not belong to this world, and somehow he was still killing. I don't remember how long I stood there after the truck disappeared. Time seemed to lose its meaning. Eventually, the cold crept back into my bones, reminding me that I was still alive and alone. I returned to the guest house in silence. The lights were off. That in itself was strange. When I had arrived earlier, the place had been warmly lit, almost inviting. Now it stood in darkness, its white walls dull and lifeless beneath the moon. I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through an empty space. Inside, the air felt different. The faint, pleasant scent was gone, replaced by a musty odor I hadn't noticed before. The counter was dusty. The polished floor I remembered now bore faint cracks and stains. It was as if the building had aged decades in the span of a few hours. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I moved deeper inside, my footsteps loud against the silence. The corridor leading to the back courtyard felt longer than before. When I stepped outside, my breath caught. The courtyard was overgrown. The lotus pond was filled with murky water, choked with dead leaves. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. The neat, orderly space I remembered no longer existed. Something shifted inside me. I climbed the stairs to the second floor. At the end of the corridor, the same red door, the paint was peeling, its color faded and uneven. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The room was no longer pristine. The white curtains were yellowed with age. Dust coated the furniture. The bed was bare, its mattress thin and stained. It looked like a room that hadn't been used in years. I backed away slowly. That was when I noticed the door at the far end of the corridor, a door I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar. A dim light flickered inside. I approached cautiously and pushed it open. The room was small, lined with shelves. At the center stood a wooden table. On it were 2 framed photographs, an incense burner, and a small urn. A memorial altar. The photographs showed a man and a little girl. The girl was the same one I had followed into the night. My chest tightened. Footsteps sounded behind me. I turned to see Ngotchthu standing in the doorway. She looked different now, older, tired. The calm, composed woman I had met earlier was gone. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "She comes back every year," Ngotchthu said. "On this night, she told me everything. Years ago, her husband had fallen deep into gambling. Debts piled up. One night, the creditors came. They beat him in front of their daughter and dragged him into the street. A truck sped through the darkness. The little girl ran after her father and was struck down. She died instantly. Her husband was killed later that same night. The man driving the truck was Trio Jai Hai. He was caught, tried, and executed. But death doesn't end everything, Ngotchthu said. Some hatred is too heavy to disappear. Every year on the anniversary of that night, the Wudahyo guest house became what I had first seen, clean, bright, frozen in time. a place where the dead could briefly pretend to live again. "And tonight," she said, her voice trembling, "you were here." I left the town at dawn. I didn't stay to write a report. There were no words that could explain what I had witnessed. I filed a minimal account, stripped of anything that would invite questions. Life moved on, or at least it pretended to. A year later, I was called in to assist with a routine inspection at a scrapyard on the outskirts of the city. Among the rusted frames and crushed metal lay an old truck, its paint flaking, its engine long dead. Something about it made my pulse quicken. I approached, scanning the exterior, then I saw it. Bullet holes. Not one, several. They were lodged deep in the metal, distorted by time, but unmistakable. I checked the measurements, the angle. They matched my service weapon. The yard manager told me the truck had been brought in exactly 1 year ago, on the same date. I checked the records again that night. Trio Jai Hai's execution date matched the day the truck arrived at the yard. I sat alone in my office, staring at the files, the weight of the realization pressing down on me. The dead do not return without reason. Some crimes refuse to stay buried, and some truths wait patiently for the right witness. I had gone to that town to verify a closed case. Instead, I became part of one that would never truly end. Winter arrived early that year. The call came in before dawn. A body had been found near the river on the northern edge of the province. When I arrived, the ground was locked in ice, the river barely moving beneath a thin, brittle crust. Officers stood in silence as the forensic team worked. The victim was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Her clothes were thin, unsuitable for the cold. Her skin had turned pale blue, her small hands curled inward as if she had tried to conserve what little warmth she had left. There were no visible wounds. She hadn't been beaten. She hadn't been pushed. She had simply been left alone. The report later confirmed what we already suspected: hypothermia. A man was found nearby, sitting on the frozen riverbank. He was dirty, unshaven, wrapped in layers of worn clothing that barely kept the cold at bay. He didn't resist when we approached. He didn't speak. He just stared at the ice. At first glance, everyone assumed he was the father. He followed us back to the station without protest. During the questioning, he told us his story. He wasn't her biological parent. He had found her years ago, wandering alone near a marketplace. She had no identification, no one searching for her. He fed her, sheltered her, and over time, she began to call him Dad. He begged relatives to take her in. They refused. "She's not our blood," they said. On the night she died, he had left briefly to find food. When he returned, she was gone. The cold did the rest. We eventually identified the girl. Her biological parents were located in a neighboring city. They arrived at the station dressed neatly, speaking in rehearsed tones. They claimed they had lost contact years ago. They expressed sorrow, but only in words. When asked why they hadn't searched for her, the mother lowered her head. "She was a burden," she said quietly. There was no law to punish them. They had abandoned her, yes, but abandonment without physical violence often leaves no legal scars. The man who raised her was released. There was no evidence of abuse, no sign of intent, only neglect shaped by poverty. As I watched him walk out of the station, shoulders hunched against the cold, I felt the same heaviness I had felt standing in that empty street a year before. 2 cases, 2 children, 2 kinds of death. one killed by hatred that refused to die, the other killed by indifference that never cared to live. I understood then what had unsettled me from the beginning. The most terrifying thing in this world is not ghosts or cursed roads or killers who return from the grave. It is the human ability to walk away, to deny responsibility, to pretend that blood defines love and that law defines morality. Some spirits linger because justice was never served. Others never rise at all, because no one loved them enough to haunt the world. I still remember the little girl standing under the street light, pointing into the darkness, and the other lying silently by the frozen river. Neither of them asked for much, only to be seen, only to be protected, only to belong. And in failing them, we revealed the true face of the monster, not the dead, but the living. If you've stayed until the end, you've walked through the darkness with me. These stories aren't just told, they're remembered. If you want to explore more cases where law meets conscience and the living brush against the dead, subscribe and follow the channel. The stories are not over yet.